Hello and welcome to the late word on Spurs. So sorry for everybody out there. If you're to the very, very first time, you can find us on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're across all major audio platforms. We're of course on X. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook, and we're on Blue Sky too. Before Ben breaks his exclusive, let me give you one more exclusive. I wasn't late. Whether you want to believe it or not, I wasn't late. If you're with us for the very, very first time, you can find us on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're across all major audio platforms. Back alongside me before I bring in our wonderful special guest alongside me again is the brilliant Jim from the Oh So Spurs podcast. Jim, thank you for making this work. Firstly, how are you? Lovely to see you with me again.
Pleasure to be on. And just to clarify, I was also not late, but I'll let you all conspire to who was the real culprit there. It was one of us. It could be like an episode of The Traitors, can't it? One of us.
Absolutely. Beep, 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 beep. Back on the show. Look, always a pleasure to have this man, Greish, as of his company. One of the busiest people in the footballing world at the moment. But guess what? We've gone and got him back. Presenter, broadcaster, journalist, obviously senior football correspondent for Give Me Sport, part of the Talk Sport network, the brilliant Ben Jacobs. Bless us with his presence, Ben. How are you? Lovely to see you.
Great to be back. You need to change that banner behind you to LROS, late Ricky on Spurs.
Oh, Ben, what are you doing to me? What are you doing to me? Especially when you say that, they'll never, ever live it down. Ben,
it was me.
So
I reveal it. I was late. I was at a Manchester City press conference here in Miami. It got delayed. It's all my fault. I apologise.
Oh, Ben, you're too kind. You are too kind. The wonderful Ben Jacobs back on Last Word on Spurs. And look, during this show, we'll be discussing what are Tottenham's moves in the market as we, of course, are once again restarting the transfer window on this Last Word on Spurs. We urge you, please, to keep liking, keep subscribing, turn the notification and bell on. You won't want to miss a trick during this transfer window where we've got you covered. Well, we might be a little bit late at times and, hopefully you love us for it. Not too late. We'll do our best. Look, we're going to start as we mean to go on. Lots to cover in this hour of Last Word on Spurs. Let's start with what is the headline news as of the time of recording, and that is Tottenham Hotspur looking like they're going to secure the permanent signing of Matisse TEL. That news broken to us by exclusively Ben Jacobs. Less actually a week ago than now, where Ben told us that Tottenham were going to hopefully get TEL over the line. And we understand Spurs and Bayern respectively are in the final stage of completing a region of a £30 million deal for Matisse TEL. There's talk of a 6-year contract on offer. Ben, fill us in, tell us more, because you exclusively told us a week ago you expect this deal to happen.
Yeah, I think a week ago it was pretty much done. So the complication is around the final number. But I come back to what I said before. The option effectively became a variable obligation, and the parties have had to discuss what the number is based upon the variable. So I'm told it's complicated, but essentially Tottenham were always going to do this deal. It wasn't an if, it was a definite. But the actual number has a bit more of a variable aspect to it. And this is partially why the loan fee was so high in the first place. 10 million euros. I know some people quote lower. 10 million euros is my number. And roughly a total package, if you include that loan fee, which was kind of a down payment of 50 million. Then, based upon the performances of the player and various more complicated criteria, the number changes slightly. And then there's always scope, even with an obligation, to go back and renegotiate payment terms and so on. But in essence, this wasn't a case of Tottenham deciding not to trigger the option, going back, seeing if they could get a better deal. This was a case of Spurs always committed to TEL, even when the loan first started, barring not playing or injury. But as soon as he basically had featured enough, all parties knew that this deal was going to happen. And that was what we broke on Last Word on Spurs. And it still remains my understanding that TEL is a Tottenham player. It's not a case of re-agreeing big parts of the deal. There's the player side, and as you say, it's likely to be a long-term contract, and it's all now being finalized, but based on the original plan of that loan with a big loan fee, which was kind of a down payment towards the permanence that Daniel Levy wanted before it even was a loan. And it's very common to hear loan with option and then just forget about it, but it's also extremely normal in the transfer market to have a loan option, they hide the obligation. If the option is triggered into the obligation, you suddenly realize the deal is done. So Tottenham always wanted TEL. It doesn't mean that they won't look at other players also on the left-hand side, because Timo Werner hasn't had his option taken. And then we wait and see what they do on the right-hand side as well. But Thomas Frank is going to have TEL, and he's going to be backed by further players in the market as well. But this was never a deal, I'm told anyway, that was in doubt.
Ben, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Look, last time you was on, Postecoglou's future was still in doubt. We've obviously had the news in this last week that Spurs have got a new man at the helm. That, of course, is Thomas Frank. Done deal. He is Spurs' new head coach, in which Tottenham broke another club record to make that happen. The 13th permanent manager under Daniel Levy. That's been confirmed. Spurs have had to pay a fee in the region, we're led to believe, of 10 million for Frank's services, while some sources say that figure could be closer to 5 million. I was going to ask you about the overall appointment, but just because of time constraints, I'm also going to tie into that as well from your perspective, Ben. You know, there was a lot of people linked with the job, the likes of Andoni Iraola, Roberto De Zerbi, there was Marco Silva. You know, I think even Tottenham, there was reports they maybe even looked at trying to get Eddie Howe. There was a report from there. And we know Pochettino, given his complex USA contract, was always difficult to try and pull off. What do you make of the overall appointment? Was there anybody else, you know, that was contacted or in the frame that maybe wasn't given out to the media or to the fans?
Broke on TalkSport the name of Frank in early April, so been on the radar for quite some time. And even though there wasn't a final determination over Ange Postecoglou's future at that point, it was clear that Tottenham were succession planning. And for those that are unaware, succession planning means we might have to make a change. We've got to line everything up. Whereas formal interviews mean you're actually going to make a change. So Frank was aware of the Tottenham opportunity even in early April. And now we know he is the new Spurs manager. So always one of the leading candidates. Andoni Iraola was another. But I think Tottenham realised very quickly that the expectation is he'll remain at Bournemouth. Marco Silva was much discussed, but at the point when he was being linked with Spurs, he was actually holding conversations with Al Hilal and then decided to stay at Fulham. He said that publicly. Let's see whether anything changes. But the public words of Marco Silva, even before Frank was appointed, are that he plans to stay at Fulham. Glasner was another name linked, but I'm not aware of any approach. And again, my expectation is that Crystal Palace's manager would only really have become available without that European football. And now it looks like they're going to have that place in the Europa League, barring anything unexpected with UEFA because of this whole John Textor situation and complaint by Nottingham Forest. And another name now widely reported that we revealed on TalkSport was that Roberto De Zerbi was a kind of left field choice. And with De Zerbi, the only real opportunity of bringing him into the recruitment process for Spurs or any other club would have been if Olympique Marseille didn't get Champions League football. And naturally, having got it, De Zerbi wants to stay and he'll be well backed in the market too. So Frank emerged as a leading contender, I would say, from mid-May onwards. But even in early April, they were thinking about, is he a fit? Does he have the right kind of mentality? You've got the Johan Lange relationship and synergy. And Tottenham were able to move very quickly because my understanding, as I reported even before this was official, is that Daniel Levy held 3 meetings with Thomas Frank prior to sacking Ange Postecoglou. So after the decision was taken to remove Postecoglou from his position, the Frank to Spurs negotiations were quite simple, but there was still the club to club. And Tottenham initially tried to see whether there was any leeway to go lower than that 10 million or rough 10 million number. I'm told the full amount of the clause has been paid. It's undisclosed naturally by both sides. But Frank, in my view, having sourced it from all sides, is nearer to that 10 than 5 million number, and would be a good appointment for Tottenham because I think he's got the right kind of philosophy on the field, but he also strikes me as the right personality and strategic fit off it.
And Ben, one prevalent topic when we appointed Ange was that he bucked the trend of most managers in the sense that he didn't bring a recurring backroom staff with him. But amongst the whole pursuit of Thomas Frank, it felt like one of the delays that was reported, one of the causes for the delays, was down to him wanting to bring quite a significant number of his backroom staff with him. The main focal point of that was Justin Cochrane, his assistant manager, because rumours were that he was offered the opportunity to interview for the first team manager role at Brentford. Is your understanding that that was the case and one of the main reasons for a bit of a drawn out period in announcing Frank?
The backroom staff definitely took some time. So the Frank to Spurs deal was quite quick and there's a clause there, but the backroom staff naturally becomes a bit more of a point of contention, especially, as you say, if you're considering promoting somebody from within. I'm not aware that the case was Justin got offered the job, but it is true that Brentford added him to their shortlist in the hope maybe that that would either turn his head, keep him at the club, or alternatively, if the process allowed them to appoint him, give him the opportunity to step into Frank's shoes. But I wouldn't go so far as to say Justin was ever a Brentford front runner as opposed to just an option of 4 or 5. And I'm certainly not aware that they countered the Tottenham offer by trying to promise him that role. He was under consideration. And whilst that possibility was there, he decided to remove himself from the Brentford process and instead follow Thomas Frank to Tottenham. The actual internal name to keep an eye on that might get the Brentford job is Keith Andrews. I'm hearing a lot of new whispers about Farioli, and then there's candidates such as Kieran McKenna and Scott Parker. So Justin was part of that shortlist, but I don't think, at least according to my information, we can go so far as to say he was offered the job or the chance to go to Spurs. He was offered an interview and a place on the shortlist. And naturally, Tottenham didn't want to give him the opportunity to let that process run its course because it might take a few more weeks. So Daniel Levy was quite clever here because he said to all the backroom staff, you move now with Frank, otherwise we'll appoint others, whether from within or alternatively elsewhere. And I think when Justin realised he had a 1 in 5 chance of Brentford versus 100% chance to move to Spurs and follow Thomas Frank, it was actually a very easy decision for him. And once that backroom negotiation ended up kind of finding a breakthrough, maybe 48 hours after Frank was actually already verbally in place, the officialization or formalization of the deal that followed was very quick.
Ben, thank you so much. Look, I said a lot's happened in the last week, right, since you last joined us. Obviously, the last time we had the pleasure of you being on here, Ange Postecoglou was still waiting to hear about his future and what that holds. And as we know, Spurs took that decision to terminate Ange Postecoglou's contract. There's actually been reports in the last 24 hours that Saudi club Al Ahly are reportedly keen on appointing Ange Postecoglou. Given your close connections to Saudi, we'd love to ask you if that's something you're also hearing as well, and what's the probability of Ange Postecoglou rocking up in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I'm hearing Ange Postecoglou is one name, and you've also got Xavi as another. It's a fascinating situation. I won't go into too much detail because I'm sure you care more about Tottenham rather than Ange Postecoglou and Al Ahly. But Al Ahly are based in Jeddah, and they won the AFC Champions League under Matthias Yassel, who used to be the Salzburg coach. So you would think he's safe. But Yassel's only got 1 year left of his contract. And mid-season, before he won the AFC Champions League, Ron Gourley, who's now departed, ex-Chelsea executive, and Lee Congleton, a very well-known and highly rated scout and sporting director, wanted Yassel out. And verbally, they sacked him in January, lined up Max Allegri. The fans revolted. They changed their mind. Yassel won the AFC Champions League. So you actually have a sort of synergy in many ways between Postecoglou's mic drop, I always win a trophy in my second season, and Yassel on the brink of being sacked, also promising Al Ahly a trophy, and he was able to win one. And if he departs, there'll be an element of overlap, and it might be quite ironic if it's Postecoglou that comes in. But right now, the problem for Postecoglou and Al Ahly is Lee Congleton wants to change manager, but there are other members of the Al Ahly board who are not so sure. And they're well aware, regardless of Postecoglou, that if Yassel goes and is forced out rather than appointed for a new opportunity, and he's being looked at, for example, by Leipzig, there's going to be more backlash, serious backlash. And we're not just talking about online complaints. There will be outside the stadium protests from in excess of 50,000 Al Ahly ultras. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. At the moment, and contrary to some reports, there's been no formal offer to Postecoglou or to Xavi, but there has been an exploratory phone call. And I am told that Postecoglou is one of those two leading contenders, at least in the sporting director Congleton's mind. But let's wait and see what happens, because there may not be a vacancy. First, we have to understand how easy it is for Jassel to go. If he joins another club, there is a release clause in his contract too. So there's a few moving parts here, but my expectation is if we get an Al Ahly vacancy, and we don't yet know, because as I've described, it's complicated, then Postecoglou will be one of the leading candidates.
Thanks. And Ben, starting to look to the future again with Frank. There's always we've got a chairman who supposedly hates the limelight, but he always finds himself in the limelight. And I find his attempts to be silent seem to have the opposite effect, right? But there's always speculation over how involved he is with decisions, right? And there's this new structure with Vinay Venkatesham obviously in place. Johan Lange, we all know he's been here a while now, but there were reports that Daniel Levy had Thomas Frank over to his house for a glass of wine or lunch, whatever it was, and he was a big part in this deal. Do you know where the power and control was from whom in the Tottenham boardroom in appointing Frank? Was it collective, or was Daniel the main decision maker in this?
Vinay, as I said on the last show, only just starting now this summer, very highly rated. I know Tottenham fans will hear the A word. I won't even say it in full on a Tottenham podcast. And I would do the same if I was on an Arsenal podcast, and I would call Tottenham the S word. But naturally, because of those links, there's maybe an immediate, I wouldn't say skepticism, but not everybody will be sold until they see him all in white doing a great job. But trust me, that's a best in class appointment. I don't think he had a particular impact. This is a Daniel Levy driven deal who single-handedly met with Frank, as I said before, multiple times. But there are some footprints of Paratici also, and Lange too. And that's normal because all these appointments have to be collaborative. But I think Levy went away and Postecoglou went away, and the final decision was just Levy in a room whilst he was away deciding, okay, we're going to pull the trigger and sack Ange. But all the bit before of finding the names involves slightly more people. And I'm told, for example, De Zerbi is a Paratici-driven name, whereas Andoni Iraola, Marco Silva, all the ones with Premier League experience, are Daniel Levy saying, how can we get somebody that will hit the ground running? And I've reported now for many months that my feeling was Tottenham were going to go for somebody with Premier League experience, and that has proven to be the case. So De Zerbi counts because he managed in the Premier League, but again, you have that same synergy, even though he's at Marseille now. So there definitely was this clear brief. And I think the job description, if you like, that said, let's interview names and appoint a final manager that's already managed in the Premier League. I think that was Daniel Levy's decision, and only his alone. We heard some slightly spurious links with Terzic, for example. But I think the reason why that kind of profile didn't develop was, again, because Levy had decided pretty much from day one, and even before it was official that Ange Postecoglou was going, that Premier League experience was necessary to make sure that Tottenham's summer heading into Champions League football is as stable as possible. And naturally, when you get a manager that understands the league, has a lot of opposition analysis, knows what it's like to go into a Big Six club and all of these things, it just means that you're not only gambling on a top CV, you're saying, once again, how can we find three things? Managerial fit, strategic fit, personality fit. And when you have managers that know the Premier League already, I think Levy's perspective, from what I'm told, is you have more chance of success because they tick all three of those boxes. And the fact that they've got experience, all the names we've mentioned, of working in England, big plus in Levy's mind. So that's the kind of common pattern with the shortlist. I think it was Have I Got News for You to do a show, right? Where they showed you 4 different pen picks and one was the odd one out. And if it was the Spurs vacancy, you would see De Zerbi, Terzic, Iriola and Frank, and you'd look for a minute and you'd go, De Zerbi's at Marseille, and then you'd clock, but wait a minute, he was at Brighton, and then you'd realise Terzic was the odd one out. And again, the synergy is the fact they've all managed in the Premier League, and that was for me the Levy influence in this process. But others like Langer and Paratici were, to my knowledge, involved as well.
And look, the key thing that underpins the chances of any manager being successful is consistent and good recruitment, right? Talking of which, and the contentious topic that always surrounds Tottenham is how much we should spend and who we should spend it on, and whether we're spending enough or not enough. But has there been any indication of whether Frank will be receiving significant budgets this summer that he has to work with, and any positions he'll be prioritising?
Yeah, I think Frank will be backed, but won't carry this sort of autonomy. So this notion he comes in and on day one changes the list. They'll have a plan, but that plan is leaning towards integrating Frank's opinion, Langer, Levy, as opposed to necessarily the old model when there was more instability at Spurs, when Postecoglou first came in, and there was a big change between Conte and Postecoglou in terms of style. So Postecoglou was lent on in that first window and maybe given more freedom. Frank's kind of a project man. If you look at how Brentford work, it's very data driven. He's perfectly happy being a head coach, and therefore within recruitment, you would expect others to be taking the final calls, but naturally they'll want to support him. And the most interesting thing, I suppose, is how exactly he's going to line up 4-2-3-1, a favoured formation at Brentford, and Brian Mbeumo, right winger, but could play more central. Johan Wissa as the striker, could trial a 3-5-2. Alternatively, 4-3-3's possibility. And we definitely saw Brentford shifting game management between 4-2-3-1 and 4-3-3. So then you start to think which kind of players might benefit in a 4-3-3. You could look at slightly, not left field name, but a player that might break through like Wilson Odobert. He'll be suited to a Frank system. Where is Archie Gray going to be utilised as a defender or a midfielder? And does that influence how they move in the market? And remember, there was that whole saga that I broke exclusively of medical at Brentford, Frank driving the move for Archie Gray, Tottenham hijack, Gray now a Spurs player, Frank comes in, you'd expect him to be a big beneficiary as well. So I think from Tottenham's perspective, there's a few things to say. Number one is they want still that kind of versatile player in an attacking sense that can go wide, but also move into more central areas. This is where on the right side, we have Mbeumo, Semenyo, Dibbling. There's links, as I've broken, with Jack Grealish. Let's see whether anything develops there. But that's another left-sided player, along with TEL. That might call into the question the future of Son. We'll discuss that, no doubt, later. But again, Son is equally as versatile too. And actually, Tottenham at their best, ironically, under Postecoglou, maybe people in the chat disagree, it was Harry Kane leaves, James Maddison on fire, and Son leading the line. Now it's Solanke leading the line, and Son has a bit more of a question mark because of his age and his form at the moment. So let's wait and see what happens there. But attacking reinforcement is going to be really important. Whether or not they add a midfielder in a central position, I think, may depend on how they utilise Archie Gray. Then it's obvious there is interest in Romero. If he departs, they'll need an elite centre-back, despite having some depth options. So that will be one to watch as well. But I think Frank's first point of call, assuming everyone's fit, will be to ask, with his input but not autonomy, for attacking reinforcements who are versatile, because we all know that when they're fit and if they all stay at Spurs, the back line on paper is one of the best already in the Premier League.
Well, I shall keep our eyes on it, Ben, and I'm sure you'll be bringing us up to date every time you're on Last Word on Spurs. You've mentioned him a couple of times already throughout this show, and not a name that's been still around the club because he hasn't ever seemingly gone away to some degree, and that is Fabio Paratici. Ben, I want to ask you about, because again, you've got some real expert knowledge in terms of the Middle East and their interest over there in certain players, managers, coaches, recruitment staff. We have heard some rumours that clubs in the Middle East have been showing an interest in Fabio Paratici, should I say. However, we again understand he is keen on rejoining Tottenham. Are you able just to give us a bit of a time frame as to your understanding, Ben, as to whether he or when will rejoin Tottenham, whether we should be concerned about potential Middle East interest?
Well, I think the first thing to say is there's 3 options, not 2. So people are looking at it as, does he join permanently or not? There may be a halfway house where Paratici actually fancies the idea of doing what Luis Campos does and making himself a consultant that could be Spurs predominant or exclusivity around England and Europe, but at the same time still consult and work with Saudi Arabia. And Luis Campos, even though not everyone realizes it, has more than just Paris Saint-Germain and QSI. So that is a possibility. And Paratici during the ban had been thinking about whether he wants to position himself as a free agent, but attached to certain clubs or projects, or go all in and back. At the moment, we can say it's likely there'll be an involvement between Paratici and Spurs because it's never really gone away. Whether that's consultant or whether that's rejoining in a full-time capacity, I think conversations are still ongoing. So no real update there, unfortunately. Then with Saudi, there's a few clubs that are looking for not just a sporting director, but somebody more in that Michael Edwards mold of a CEO of sport. And Paratici is one name of interest, but I'm not aware of anything advanced between Paratici and Saudi Arabia. You've got Al Hilal and very possibly Al Ittihad, 2 of the big PIF clubs that will be looking to bring in either a sporting director or someone a little bit higher. And again, by higher, I mean, they still in the Saudi model might be doing the recruitment part, yet they will have wider responsibilities that may be expanding the development of the club from grassroots or infrastructure, or alternatively, as we find with a lot of these Saudi projects, moving into multi-sports. So Dougie Freeman left Crystal Palace, as I exclusively broke, to Diriyah, one of the big Saudi projects, even though the football team are not yet anywhere near the Saudi Pro League. And then the appeal was about managing the recruitment like a standard sporting director, but also being a wider multi-sports executive. And this is kind of what Al Hilal and Al Ittihad are pitching. And it's why it's so interesting to sports executives. I'm told, contrary to reports in Saudi Arabia, and I have huge respect for Al Riyadh, which is one of the biggest and most credible sports papers in Saudi Arabia. They ran yesterday that Paratici, along with a name in Spain, and Michael Edwards, as well as Paul Mitchell, outgoing from PIF-controlled Newcastle, were all on the list for Al Hilal. Mitchell, I can confirm. Paratici, I had downplayed. We'll wait and see if anything develops, though. And Michael Edwards, Al Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, said was done. That is not my understanding, quite the opposite. I'm told Edwards will not be joining Al Hilal. And if he was to venture into Saudi Arabia, not that I'm suggesting he has an offer from this club, but his strongest relationship and respect for their model is with Al Ittihad, the current Saudi Pro League champions. So there's a lot of smoke coming out about best-in-class executive appointments, and Paratici's name has been bandied around. But at this stage, I'll let you know if it changes. I'm not actually aware of anything advanced between Saudi Arabia and Paratici.
Ben, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Look, we're going to very quickly fit in our next break of the show, and the breath that's going to come out of Jim's mouth, what you want to hear, you ain't going to want to miss it. I promise you. I promise you. We have got over 18,000 of you that are watching this show live. As always, thank you so much for all your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs and what's going to be an absolutely intriguing summer. And put this in perspective, we've had Ben back twice already. We've not even reopened the market yet. Can you believe it? We are going to be driving Ben mad throughout the summer. Like I say, he's become a really integral go-to journalist for us on Last Word on Spurs. We absolutely love having him on here. I would implore you, go and make sure you do follow Ben's coverage. He's not just obviously on the Tottenham aspect, but he's of course on the worldwide aspect. Of course, great work over in relation to the different countries that he covers. And like I say, we'll give out more about where you can find Ben towards the end of the show. But of course, Ben Jacobs, broadcaster, presenter, journalist. Like I say,
come on, Ricky. We're short on time here. Stop buttering me up and get on with the transfer questions.
That's the first time Ben's moving me on. I can't believe it. I'm praising him. We love him very much. And we're joined by Jim at Oso Spurs. Please check that podcast out. Keep liking. Keep subscribing. I'm going to shut up. I'm bringing Jim back involved. Jim, shut me up. Take over.
Everyone just wants to hear about Brian and Mbeumo, right? Let's get the question in. Let's get it in. Look, Ben, we live in a weird world. I never thought was possible that rumours are we are able to outbid. 10 years ago, we said this was the case. I'll just call you mad. But Spurs seem in the position where we can outbid Man United for a football player. And reports say we're doing that or have done that. Is there any truth in this one? And because the player as well kind of publicly came out to say Man United, well, the reports came out to say that Man United is where they wanted to go. But that was prior to our concrete interest as well, right? Has anything changed around him?
Well, first of all, huge respect to Darren Lewis. What a fantastic journalist, and I always enjoy his work. So my information I'll give you, but I just want to say he's a brilliant journalist and one of the best in the business. Now, with Mbeumo, it feels quite coincidental to me, speaking to sources, that the day after Thomas Frank is appointed, and again, I come back to what I said before, he carries no recruitment autonomy. He's a leading voice and an important one. There'll be no veto. There'll be nothing bartered into his appointment that says we will bid for Mbeumo. And yet a day after he is appointed as the Spurs manager, a 70 million bid goes in. And what's strange about that is that Manchester United's rejected bid was £45 million plus 10 million in add-ons. Now, when have we ever seen Daniel Levy go from 55 million, with Brentford wanting 62.5 million or so to match the Matheus Cunha figure, to jumping above that number and hitting 70 million? It's a big increase from 55 million to 70 million. And I'm told at this stage that there has been no formal bid from Tottenham for Bryan Mbeumo. Have there been conversations verbally? Yes. Are they interested? Absolutely. Are there other options? Of course. Semenyo, Dibbling, to name but two. Bryan Mbeumo told all suitors, including Spurs, his preference was Manchester United. Players don't always get their preference. And by the way, much like you applying for jobs, you could have 3 job offers. You would be forced to rank them, but that doesn't mean that you don't think all 3 job offers are brilliant. So nobody's saying that Mbeumo has rejected Tottenham, but he has made it clear to suitors if Manchester United agree a fee with Brentford, he would like to go to Manchester United. What do Brentford want in an ideal world? 70 million. What might they settle for? 62.5, the same number that Manchester United paid for Matheus Cunha. And a day after Thomas Frank is appointed, suddenly we hear the Brentford 70 million number, which is high, has been hit by Tottenham, and that Daniel Levy has gone £15 million above the Manchester United bid. And again, I've got huge respect, and you always have to appreciate that even if your information is one thing, another journalist might have outscooped you or have better sources in a particular area. So I'm not here to shout anyone else's work down. I'm just not personally aware yet of a formal Spurs bid for Mbeumo. And I would be personally surprised if Manchester United bid 55 package, if Tottenham came in immediately at 70. But it helps Brentford to have new suitors, because naturally they got more chance of getting a number closer to 70 million if there's more than one bidder. So I think if we had a scenario where Tottenham agreed a fee with Brentford and Manchester United, who are trying to be decisive, but that also includes walking away if they feel there's no value to be had, should they not agree a fee, Mbeumo for me would not stay at Brentford. He would follow Thomas Frank to Spurs. If we have a scenario where both Manchester United and Tottenham agree an identical package with Brentford, and it's only on where the player wants to go, my information remains that Mbeumo is favouring a move to Manchester United. So Tottenham's tactic, if they want Mbeumo, has to be to agree a fee with Brentford first. And I tell you something, if they did bid 70 million, I'm not here to shout down a fantastic journalist's work. So if that's correct, it would surprise me if it's not accepted by Brentford, because that is their top end valuation. So once again, I know it's a bit doom and gloom for Spurs fans. If both clubs agree a fee, I expect Mbeumo, unless he has a U-turn in his position, and you never know because of the Thomas Frank factor, but his position, I'm told, is to favour Manchester United. But there is a scenario where Manchester United walk away because they're not prepared to meet the valuation. Tottenham say with Champions League money, we're going to put big investment behind Mbeumo because of the Thomas Frank factor and how much he knows and likes the player. And then you may get a scenario, and again, we're just talking scenarios of how the market might play out, where Manchester United walk away. And at that point, Mbeumo's not going to say, I'm going to wait all summer for Manchester United. He's going to say, brilliant, I'll go and play Champions League football with Spurs. So that's where we're at the moment. There's a series of variables and moving parts. I can't give any more clarity at the moment on this 70 million bid. But what I would say is if it is correct, and I'm not personally aware of a formal bid yet, then should the number be 70 million, it is at Brentford's top end asking price.
Ben, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Just to follow on from that, I mean, he's not been the only player from Brentford linked to Spurs. We've seen, obviously, reports in these last 24, 48, 72 hours of the likes of, you've got Johan Visser that's been linked to the club, along with Nathan Collins. I've seen a couple of outlets also suggest Damsgaard may be a player Spurs would also target. Have you heard anything concrete on these three respective players potentially being of an interest to Tottenham in addition to Mbeumo?
Well, Frank will obviously know a lot of these players well. Damsgaard in particular, Frank rates very highly. Brentford's perspective, even though there's nothing obviously contractually stopping Spurs from raiding Brentford, but they won't want to lose too many of their stars. And I think they will also want to wait to hire a new manager so he can input into the process. If it's Keith Andrews, it'll be a bit easier because he'll be promoted from a set piece coach. So therefore will know the squad and ultimately be able to give feedback as to who he might be prepared to let go. The good news when you deal with Brentford is they're a bit like Brighton. They're data driven. There is always a number that they'll sell for in theory. The bad news is you don't really get given that number many times, which is why it's a surprise that the 70 million number for Mbeumo is kind of public knowledge, because usually Brentford like to keep everything as quiet as they possibly can and never give suitors numbers directly. So you can bid blind sometimes when dealing with Brentford, but everything is very data driven. So they have algorithms to determine the valuation of the player. And if it suits all parties, like Brighton, and some would say Bournemouth as well, they would be prepared to sell. However, if you're talking Mbeumo Damsgaard, maybe. If you're talking Wisser Mbeumo, I would be surprised. I think Brentford's perspective is they desperately, after also losing Ivan Toney and all his goals to Saudi Arabia, want to make sure they start this Premier League season and close the summer window with either Mbeumo or Wisser. If it's both, absolute icing on the cake. But it's fair to say that each of these names has a price, but their futures may be intertwined. So the first one of the two that potentially departs might actually end up shutting the door for the other one to exit.
And what about our 2020s version of Leandro Damião, right? A name that never seems to leave Tottenham side at the moment is Eze. Palace, I think the blocker a lot of people are aware of is they want a big upfront fee, and although Spurs are in a position to offset, deals over long periods of time and in a really strong position to leverage a position of strength there with their revenues and everything else, that makes this deal a little trickier. Is the Eze talk, but is it just noise because us fans feel it's a logical one? It makes sense. He's homegrown, etc. Or is there actual genuine pursuit of him?
It's a bit more than noise, from what I understand. He's slightly different to like Jack Grealish, who we mentioned before, or even a TEL, and maybe a bit more in the Son mold in the sense that he's very comfortable playing in that predominant attacking midfield. He can go right behind the striker. He can play left winger, and he can also drop deeper into left midfield. And that gives you a lot of coverage. Also, the market value is seen at the moment at roughly 45 to 50 million, and the release clause a little bit higher than that, but under 70 million. And therefore, even if you trigger the clause, many clubs may feel this summer they're getting relatively good value for money. The challenge is that the clause, as with Michael Olise, is complicated. You have to go through the front door, express your interest to Crystal Palace. They collate the interest. If there's more than one suitor that expresses, and you have to do it in writing, I'm told, you're going to trigger the clause, or even you want to negotiate outside of it, you then have to wait for the player. And Eze is basically following the blueprint of Olise, because I'm told he liked that meticulous and quite formal process. So then from there, Palace inform the player. The player then has to write to Palace formally and say, the clause is going to be triggered. Can I have permission to speak to this club. Palace already know about that club's interest because they went through the front door to begin with. And already, as you can probably tell from listening to me, it gets quite confusing because you're like, wait a minute, we inquired to Palace, they said put it in writing. They then told Eze, we were then allowed to speak to Eze. Eze made up his mind. Eze then writes to Palace. Palace informed the club. Then the clause is triggered. And it goes round and round in circles like that. Or you just go make an offer below the clause and then you're negotiating with Crystal Palace. But maybe the player says, actually, he would prefer for you to follow the process around the clause, even if you don't trigger it. And this is what makes it really time consuming. And it's why the Michael Olise situation had several clubs all going to Crystal Palace at the same time. So keep an eye on Eberechi Eze. The reason why I explain it in that level of detail is because once you get one concrete suitor for Eze, I would expect there to almost be a soft deadline for all other suitors for Eze. And you may see this big flurry of, oh, Spurs are moving on Eze, but so are several other clubs. Why are they all moving at the same time? And it's because, once again, Eze will control the timeline of an exit like that if he decides to leave. But of course, Crystal Palace have also got Europa League football at the moment. We'll wait and see what happens with the UEFA complaint and Nottingham Forest letter. But at the moment, they've got Europa League football, and that makes it all the harder. So yes, a concrete target, but I would be surprised if Tottenham feel the clause is worth triggering, but they might match it if they choose to proceed. I think the only nagging doubt with Eze is that if TEL stays, they may feel more inclined to find another left-sided player and then move for a right-sided player like Mbeumo, Semenyo, that can move into that attacking midfield position. And I also think that James Maddison will be utilised as an advanced 8 or a 10 and given a lot of freedom under Thomas Frank as well. Whereas if Eze comes in, he'll probably want to start and centrally. I think Tottenham are almost looking for two touchline hugging modern attackers that are 50% winger, 50% forward. And I think Eze, for me, some in the chat might disagree, and I'm no tactician, so I don't claim to be an expert here. It's just from watching him. I think he's more attacking midfielder. And right now, I think Tottenham want attackers or forwards or wingers. Yep. And I just think, even though Eze can go over on that left wing, he's more attacking midfielder. And that might not be as big a priority for Tottenham, especially if James Maddison can get going.
Time's up against us, Ben. So I'm going to just put two names into the conversation here.
I'm going to give you bonus time. I give you until 50. So we've got 15 minutes.
Okay. Thank you so much. God, I'm on countdown now. God. Right. Jack Grealish, you, I think, have personally reported this genuine interest from Tottenham side. Another name, again, it appears we're hearing Spurs step up their interest in is on Antoine Semenyo. Give us your understanding on both Jack Grealish, Semenyo. What is happening in relation to Tottenham with regards to both of these players?
Yeah, big interest in Semenyo. I would go so far as to say that if Mbeumo doesn't come off, Semenyo is the number one choice. You've got Tyler Dibbling as well, but he didn't play as often or have as strong a second half of the season. But there was a managerial change, and after Russell Martin left, Dibbling wasn't the same player. Dibbling, despite a Southampton public price of 100 million, is going to be available for closer to what Spurs paid for James Maddison, in my view, but that's a sourced view. And I believe the price could be 40, 45, not in excess of 50, and nowhere near 100 million. 100 million is just a ward off the market in the hope that he stays at Southampton and helps them to get promoted again. And will still may be a factor in keeping him there, because remember, with Dibbling, he's quite an introvert and he likes to be close to his family. And when he left Southampton for Chelsea, he didn't like it at Cobham, didn't settle in that highly competitive environment, came straight back to Southampton. So don't be surprised if Dibbling actually feels stability is what he wants for another year. But if Tottenham bid, they feel confident that they could persuade him to join. But Semenyo, for me, is above Dibbling at the moment. And then Mbeumo is the kind of wild card or dark horse, and we have to wait and see what happens with Manchester United. From Bournemouth's perspective, they don't want this mass exodus. So they've lost Steenhausen. Milos is expected to go to Liverpool. Zabanyu's being linked with PSG. Justin Kluivert is on the Leverkusen list. Semenyo's been looked at by Tottenham, Manchester United, Arsenal, Newcastle, and more. So when you add all that up, it's going to be quite key who goes in when for which Bournemouth player. Because there'll come a point where Bill Foley turns around and says, we're done. We've brought in loads of money. Our PSR position is now okay. We're not going to let everyone go. Otherwise, Andoni Iraola has no reason to potentially extend. So I don't think we're just looking at these Bournemouth names individually. We're almost seeing who goes where first, because it might shut the door to other opportunities, a bit like I was saying with Mbeumo and Wissa. With Jack Grealish, it's maybe the most interesting scenario. I'm here in Miami. I was with Manchester City this morning, and Grealish is not part of this Club World Cup squad. He's been told he's got the month of June to start exploring a new club. And a lot will depend on Manchester City in this narrative. What kind of structure or price are they willing to give? Because you've got Everton, who are a serious suitor, but they won't do Grealish unless it's a loan. You have Tottenham, who might be prepared to do more of a permanent deal, but still might want to try before they buy aspect.
Right.
And then you have Grealish's wages.
Yep.
That are a big factor in all of this as well. So I think Grealish is a difficult and time-consuming deal. The Tottenham interest is genuine, but they're going to have to understand that it might take until Man City, ironically, return from the Club World Cup, even though Grealish is free to speak to other clubs, to really get a clear picture of, is Jack Grealish going to be allowed to be loaned? Is he going to take a wage cut? And what kind of price for permanence might he be available for? Because Tottenham are not going to overpay for a player like Grealish. Then another thing to bear in mind with Grealish is a big thing he's been told by Thomas Tuchel is, if you're playing regularly, you still stand a chance of this England World Cup squad. Yep. Because Tuchel's not about Southgate, long-term project, join for 2 World Cups. We'll win it in Qatar. We'll win it in 2026. We'll win it in 2030. We'll win it in Saudi in 2034. Tuchel has 1 World Cup. And he's saying to every player, whether you're 16 or 100, if you're good enough for that 1 World Cup, you're in my squad.
Yep.
And that's where Henderson back in, Ivan Toney playing in Saudi Arabia, recalled in the last squad. So there is hope for Jack Grealish in England, but he's got to be playing every single week. And my only thing about Tottenham is, if Son is at the club and TEL stays, and there's a lot of other versatile players, how often does Jack Grealish start? And is it more than he's doing at Man City? And only Grealish will know that. So it's an option for Tottenham, but I'm not aware that it's advanced yet. Keep an eye on Everton if a loan becomes available. And then I'm told it's a no for Newcastle. And that won't really change unless unexpectedly Anthony Gordon is sold, because Harvey Barnes was brilliant for Newcastle in the back half of the season. Anthony Gordon is a default starter when he's fit. So Grealish wouldn't have space to come in a 4-3-3 and play on that left-hand side for Newcastle United. So it wouldn't be Spurs against Newcastle, but it might be loan against permanent deal. And in the end, I kind of sense what might happen with Grealish is the same as Calvin Phillips, where there's a lot of buzz and inquiries, and Tottenham might be one of those teams. But eventually, I think the most feasible thing for Grealish will be to go and do a season-long loan, maybe with an option or an obligation, get himself into the England setup and assess in summer 2026. I'm not saying that Spurs wouldn't consider that try before you buy type model, but if City sanction that, Everton are the side that are really going to be pushing for Jack Grealish, and he has options abroad as well.
I'm looking at the time and it's ticking away from us. Before I throw you over to Jim, just very quickly to confirm what you said 5 minutes ago or ish. Is that right in saying it will be one of Mbeumo or Semenyo? You can't see a world in which Tottenham could sign both?
I mean, not impossible, obviously, because they can play in different positions. But if you look at the financial outlay, I think Semenyo, I'm told, Bournemouth want more than Dom Solanke's fee. Simple as that. It will be a club world record for Semenyo. Mbeumo might be a club record as well, because he could go for more than the Dom Solanke fee. So to get both, you're potentially looking at 120 to 140 million total outlay. I'm not so sure that Spurs, even if they were genuinely both available and willing to join, would do both. That's just my opinion. I certainly don't want to take any of the excitement of the transfer market away from Tottenham fans. So you can never say never in football, but it does feel like they've got a list of options and their intent is to bring in one, not two.
And quickly, another name before we lose you is Gibbs White that won't seem to leave us as well. And any defenders as well? We're talking about a lot of attackers, but there's been a few like Ndika from Roma and Tomori. Gahey's obviously another that didn't work out. Yeah. Spurs were interested in before. Any of those names?
Yeah, Tomori they really like. I'm not so sure whether it's advancing. Gay's the most interesting one. We hear a lot of reports of Chelsea. I'm not so sure that will happen anymore. Very possible in the January market. And that was when Tottenham also bid for the player too. So let's see if they return. Because the 70 million that was turned away when Daniel Levy showed real ambition in January, suddenly now, because they only got a year left of his contract, might be 50 or 55 million, possibly even less if the player agitates for an exit. But I come back to what I said before, Palace winning the FA Cup and having Europa League football are very different in the market and have appealed to their players compared to if no European football. But the good news for Spurs is they could offer Gay Champions League football. So that one might be one to watch because Gay is going to be available if he doesn't sign a new deal at value this summer, whereas quite clearly in January, there was no possibility of an exit. And you can read into that what you like, because sometimes clubs just like it out there. We tried, and they know the answer before they bid. I remember when Saudi went for Mbappe, they put a crazy world record offer down, but they always knew that he wasn't going to join, but it makes nice headlines. Daniel Levy bidding 70 million for Mark Gahey in January? That's very un-Spurs-like. So was that a bid for optics? Was that a bid to lay the foundations for this summer? Or did he genuinely think that would be accepted? Because honestly, at 70 million, I was quite surprised it wasn't, because we were told the price in the summer when Newcastle tried was 65. Yeah. So Gay still could be one to watch. I'm told that Tottenham have got a lot of defensive targets, but they're still assessing at this point the same as Chelsea. Chelsea are more likely to go for a centre-back, left-back, and Gay doesn't quite tick all the boxes. This is where Jorel Hatto comes in, and you've also got the possibility of Arsenal for Hatto too. Tottenham have discussed Hatto in the past, but I don't think they're in the race at the moment. And then they'll be opportunistic if other defensive names become available. I know they like Zabanyi, but it looks like it's PSG that are really pushing there. And I think he's quite keen if he leaves Bournemouth to actually exit the Premier League. But that's another name that Tottenham have also discussed in the past. So there could be a defensive reinforcement. In fact, I think there probably will be. But as I said right at the top of the show, if these defenders are fit, Tottenham's back line is a Champions League back line. So do you add young depth, or are you assuming Romero's going to get his move to La Liga? And then the whole situation changes, because you have to say, should Romero depart, we go from all these attacking targets and a calmness about our defense to suddenly needing an elite centre-back to replace Romero. So that's going to be one to watch. Romero, Atletico Madrid. Let's see if that advances, because that might change the caliber and the profile and the age of the centre-back that Tottenham potentially are looking for.
Ben, I might need defensive protection. I'm looking at the clock. We're going to try and work on the timing very quickly. Just give us your understanding of what you understand needed to be the latest with Christian Romero and Heung-min Son, if you can. Of course, Son, captain of the club. Christian Romero, vice captain. Of course, we saw within the hour of Thomas Frank being appointed, Romero came out with his public affection for Ange Postecoglou, in which I think many would have picked up the line from the post that read, "From day one, you paved the way despite the many obstacles that always exist and always will." That always existed and always will exist. Very quickly, Heung-min Son, Christian Romero, Ben, would you understand to be the latest on those two?
Yeah, and I'll add Ben Davies as well, only because Ben Davies and Son are sort of similar in the sense that Davies and Son get their extension. Same with Ilkay Gundogan at Man City, and you think they've been extended, so they're staying. But sometimes you extend to protect value, and of course you don't do an extension solely so you can sell at a higher number. But just because someone extends, it doesn't mean that there isn't an openness at the right price to still doing business. And it's win-win, right? Because you either extend because you want to keep them, or you extend and you protect their value. And that's where we're at. Wrexham like Davis, Leeds too, but he did really well filling in when Spurs had injuries. And this is why he earned that extension, which 6 months ago would have been viewed as unlikely and a surprise. So I think at this stage, Tottenham are happy with Ben Davies, but there is naturally interest in him, including from Leeds United and Wrexham, as I said before. With Son, we keep hearing Saudi Arabia. And I must admit, since 2023, when I first broke this story, Son is on the Saudi list. Back in summer 2023, there was this huge list of all the world's football stars. And they whittled it down to 20. And they said, we want about 50% of them in summer 2023. And believe it or not, they got about 50% off the back of Ronaldo joining, the likes of Karim Benzema, Riyad Mahrez. Son was one of the 50% that didn't join. They asked him again a year ago, And again, he said no. And right now, I have no information that suggests Son has changed his mind about Saudi Arabia. From Saudi's point of view, if they get a green light, they want Son tomorrow, because he's not just seen as a fantastic profile, most likely for one of the PIF clubs, but keep an eye on Al Qadsiya as well. But the fact that he brings with him this off-field personality and smile, this huge media audience. And what's happening right now in Saudi Arabia is they are selling the television rights internationally, and they would love the idea of finding stars from all these different regions where they can do sub-deals. So Salah for Egypt, but it didn't come off. Son for South Korea. Let's see if it comes off. Because if these players join, you can make an argument they pay for themselves, because if you do a television rights deal off the back of it, then the investment behind the player is offset by that. And that's why we saw Victor Osimhen, Nigeria. But again, Al Hilal couldn't get it over the line. So Saudi and Son is always going to be one to watch, even if he goes elsewhere first. But I think if Son leaves, he'll end up staying in Europe or going to MLS. And right now, I don't think we can give clarity on his future, because Tottenham want to be respectful to Son. And if he leaves, it will be on his own terms. If he wants to stay another season, they've triggered the clause. And he's not the kind of player, if he's on the bench more, that's going to be throwing his toys out the pram. He'll still be the club captain and so on. And I'd love to be able to tell you, and I know people will want a straight answer here, but as a journalist, you can't jump ahead of a process or the market if the key decision makers, including Son, haven't yet decided. And right now, Frank's come in and hasn't had that conversation or seen Son on the training ground. Son doesn't know if he's going to play 3-5-2, 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3. So Frank and Son's relationship, despite a lot of rumors, suggestions, stories in the next 2 weeks, that Frank-Son relationship is going to be key. Where does Son fit in the system? Who else do they bring in? What does Frank say to Son about his game time? And then from there, the picture should be clearer. But I really think, unless he changes his mind against a move to Saudi, and the money just speaks for itself, and therefore something happens really quickly, if you discount that scenario, I think we're going to have to be patient with Son and his future. There is a possibility he could go. That can't be denied. But I think we just have to wait for the appropriate steps. And if Son and Frank haven't really spoken or even had a training session together, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen there.
And one that's changed, in terms of value to Spurs, it appears over the last couple of days, is one that you reported on, I believe, Ben, in Manuel Solomon. Could you give us an update on him? And can you just cap off really quickly, because someone in the comments has been really desperate to hear about Simmons as well. And I feel like we should just give them like 10 seconds on that.
Simmons very quick.
Yeah, we'll do two quick ones then there. So Manuel Solomon, the situation is the player side would prefer to do preseason with Tottenham and try and win a place in Thomas Frank's team. That is the Solomon perspective. And I'm very confident in that. Tottenham's perspective may be different, and we don't know how quickly they're going to assess him. But Solomon's in no rush. Leeds would like to sign him permanently. They've got Premier League football. Solomon wants to come back to Spurs and do a bit of pre-season. Let's wait and see how early in the window formal bids are placed, because there will be some formal offers for Manuel Solomon. But a bit like we were saying with Son, Solomon's thinking new manager, Champions League football, come back. Why not try and fight my way into the team? I don't need to decide if I want to go to Leeds or elsewhere today, tomorrow. Give it a week or two. You might impress Thomas Frank. Situation might change. And here's a good example, right? Jed Spence, for months, exit. For months, Genoa. For months, option to buy. For months, option to buy, but at a lower number. Nothing happened. Comes back to Tottenham. Forces his way into the reckoning. And now is winning a lot of plaudits from Tottenham fans. And I think if Solomon looks at that example, he'll be thinking, why not me? I can do exactly the same thing. And I can tell you something. Thomas Frank is extremely fair. He won't come in with preconceptions about wage, about ego, about club standing, captains, vice captains. That's not how Thomas Frank works. He'll be looking at data. He'll be looking at system fit. He'll be building one-on-one relationships. And that's where, again, Thomas Frank, football fit, strategic fit, tactical fit, personality fit. This is why I think he's going to be a huge success at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. And I really hope so, because the fans don't deserve one trophy and then another drought and then another wait and then everyone go, oh, but we'll take it again, returning to how we were in the past because we've got the Europa League. The fans deserve a project that improves season on season on season. Fantastic stadium, brilliant training facility in London, incredible players, money because of Champions League football to spend. And Thomas Frank is just the kind of character I, personally, it's only my opinion, want to see succeed, because he's had so many nearly opportunities where he's been linked with Manchester United, he's been spoken about in the past with Chelsea, and for whatever reason, maybe because it was never as advanced, or maybe because another candidate beat him to it, he's never had that chance. But the fact that virtually every Premier League top half club that's had a vacancy has had Frank on their list in some degree shows you this is a guy people think can make the step up from a fantastic job at Brentford to doing something in the Premier League, in the top four, and also in the Champions League. And I really think when you get a manager like that, players realise it's a blank slate, build off the momentum of Ange, but Frank's going to be giving everyone a very fair chance on an even keel, and Solomon will think that. With Xavi Simons, the situation is a lot harder. Tottenham like Simons, Chelsea have looked historically in the past, Man United. But number one, he may find he's stuck at Leipzig for another season, which wouldn't be a disaster. And number two, if he's not, the price has to come down. And this was a mastermind of a deal from PSG. They loaned him because if they'd have sold him to Leipzig at that point because he was surplus to the project, all of the money would have gone to PSV. I stress the V because I know it's confusing, PSG, PSV. But all the money would have gone to PSV. They had to wait until that January when the deal became permanent. And the 100% sell-on expired. And then PSG got all of the money instead of none of the money. And this is why the deal happened. Then the total package for Leipzig, which is an astonishing amount of money for them, is 80 million euros they paid PSG. But caveated by the fact that it's 50 million euros up front and then 30 million in add-ons. And we don't really know how much of them have been paid. So long and short of it is Leipzig want to make a profit here. Whether that's none of the add-ons and they'll sell for 55, 60, or whether that's most of the add-ons and they'll want 80. And suitors don't really realize yet what the price point is. So for Spurs and Simons, at 60 million euros, I would genuinely expect them to be there. And I think Morgan Gibbs-White, that was discussed before, will still be in demand, even though Man City are not going to move. They brought in Cherki. He's a player that could leave. And he's also on the list of Al-Ali Gibbs-White, I'm told. So Simons and Premier League clubs could genuinely be one to watch. And I can confirm that Spurs like the player, but they've not started talks. They've not decided they're going to bid yet. And again, keep an eye on the price. We're going to hear a lot of Xavi Simons stories. We're going to hear a lot of buzz about where he may or may not go. We're going to hear a lot of it's 50, it's 60, it's 70, it's 80, it's 90 million. And that all depends on those add-ons, because the only way Leipzig are going to sanction a sale, regardless of what the player wants, is if the total guaranteed fee is more than they paid, because they only signed him recently. So they're not going to sell at a book loss. And if those add-ons have also been paid, there is a genuine danger that Simons gets priced out of the market. So I know fans hate it when this is said by journalists, so I apologize in advance, but I've just got no other words for explaining it. If you want to put it in the chat and give me another lexicographical suggestion, then feel free. But it is one to watch. And if you can find a better way of one to watch or monitoring, then please let me know, because I'd love to be able to describe this phase of a potential only deal in ways that irritate fans a little bit less. But I've never quite found the catchphrase. So Simons to Spurs might be one to watch, but we're not really in a stage at the moment where they're moving on that deal.
Ben, you're a superstar. We now have to let you go. The countdown clock is firmly over, but we have to ask you always the traditional question on Last Word on Spurs to close it. The last time we had you here, I think 7 days ago, 6 days ago, it's been a long time in the transfer market. You know more than me. You know more than me. You told us on the show that you would guesstimate at the time 5 new signings. You wasn't going to commit, whether that was with or with not the manager being included. I know we're going to drive you mad across the summer, Ben. Gut feeling now from what you've seen over the last week. Frank through the door. TEL most likely done. Your exclusive you've given us on here. Gut feeling about how many number? Can you give us a number?
I mean, gut feeling is the same. I know it's boring, but I was on so recently that you wouldn't expect it to change. I'm going to go with 5, and I am going to count Frank as one of those 5. So I think there'll be minimum 4 signings for Spurs this summer. And if there's 5, next time I'm on, I'll lie and I'll pretend that I never said Frank was inclusive. I'll say it was a slip up and I meant exclusive of that 5. But yeah, I'm going to go with Frank plus 4 as my non-binding prediction for what we'll see over the coming weeks.
Amazing. Ben, you know, we love you. We adore you. Whenever we get a chance to grab you on this show. Look, of course, it's a busy summer for you. There'll be more, I'm sure, updates to come. Where can we find the wonderful work you are doing right now for the footballing community, for us Spurs fans? Where can we find you, Ben? Tell us.
So I'm out here in Miami, and thank you for allowing me to plug this. I'm with TalkSport. We are an official radio broadcaster for the Club World Cup. I'm going to the opening game this evening, which is why we're a little bit tight for time, into Miami against Al Ahly. Hear me on TalkSport for transfer news. I'm a senior football correspondent for Gimme Sport. All of my writing goes through Gimme Sport with many features and Tottenham news. And then, of course, on X at JacobsBen and on Instagram at Ben David Jacobs. But more important than my handles, you're going to get all your Spurs news on here. So make sure you keep following and listening to Last Word on Spurs, a far better place for Spurs news than any of the personal platforms, at least, that I've just given you.
Ben, you're a superstar. We love you very much. Jim, thank you so much from Also Spurs team. Make sure you check him out. Keep following Ben for the latest up-to-date news. Keep following us. Like, subscribe. Thank you so much for your support from myself, Jim, from Ben. We have been the last one on Spurs. We'll see you back before you know it. As always, take care. And as always, come on, you Spurs.